Hello, my name is Julie Collins. I'm a professor and the coordinator of the graduate reading program at the University of Central Oklahoma. I was a member of the English Language Arts Standards Writing Team. I'm here today to visit with you about Standard 2, Reading and Writing Processes. In this standard, students will learn to use a variety of recursive reading and writing processes. This standard is your opportunity to teach students about the goal of both reading and writing, that the goal of reading is to comprehend the text, and that the goal of writing is to communicate a message to their audience. The reading standard that goes throughout the grade levels from pre-kindergarten through 12th grade says that students will read and comprehend increasingly complex literary and informational texts. You'll see throughout the standard that it starts with pre-kindergarten doing simpler things like sequencing the beginning, middle, and end of a story. And that will get more and more complex up into the high school standards. The same for going from a main idea to finding that main idea, being able to summarize things, and then find details to support that main idea, and more complex as well. What you will also find is that it's sometimes hard to differentiate between what they should do in 3rd grade and what they should do in 4th grade and what they should do in 5th grade. How does finding the main idea look different? So you'll see a lot of similarity between some of the grade levels and how the standard is written. So it's important to keep in mind that overarching standard that they will comprehend increasingly complex literary and informational texts. So part of your job as the teacher is to make sure that you are increasing that complexity and difficulty of the text so that they can continue to stretch themselves in their reading strategies with the more challenging texts. When the standards were first written, the word recursive caused a few questions. So recursive refers to the fact that sometimes we learn a process and there are 5 steps or 10 steps, and you learn a process to start at 1 and just do all the steps. Recursive refers to the fact that it is not linear like that, that there are different steps, different strategies you might learn to use, and that you need to choose the right one at the right time. And you may go forward, you may need to back up and go back and reread something, call on a different strategy to make sure that you're understanding the word or understanding that passage. So keep that in mind, that sometimes is hard for students to know. So that's something that you need to model and work with them on, because being able to go back and reread and call on the strategies they need are the behavior of a good reader, and so that needs to be taught to them. Within the reading process, this standard is going to focus on the student being engaged in the reading process before they read, while they're reading, and after they're reading. So before they read, they need to be able to look at a text, decide on why they're reading the text. And for students, a lot of times they might say, well, you're telling me to read the text. And so it's an assignment. But we want them to develop the ability to look at a text and decide if they want to read it and why they would be reading it. Are they reading it to learn something? Are they going to read it for pleasure? Is it something they want to read? Is it something they're going to need a little bit of a motivation boost to read because they need to read it? They also might be reading it to be informed. They might be reading it to be entertained. There's a stance involved as far as information or entertainment. There's also, they might need to draw on their own motivation, their own attitude toward reading that will help them with their approach to reading the text. During reading, it's important that they're engaged in making sure that they're keeping track of whether they understand what they're reading, knowing whether they need to go back and reread. Do they need to go back and try some other strategies? If they've come across a new word, do they need to be able to break it apart, think about what the sections, different parts of the word mean? Do they need to go back and rely on their decoding ability just to figure out what the word is and then figure out what it means? And they need to also be questioning themselves. Did I understand that part correctly? After reading, students need to be involved and know that they can still look at the text. I know sometimes that becomes a question when we're assessing a child, but if they're reading and doing a project, answering questions, participating in a book discussion, we want them to know the text is a resource for them and they should be able to go back and still be engaged with that text. The writing process standard is that students will develop and strengthen writing by engaging in a recursive process that includes pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing, and publication. You know from your own experience that not everything you write goes from an idea to a draft to publication, and students need to learn that as well. Here again, we want to focus on the recursive nature of that process of writing. We have these different stages, so students may spend time thinking about, writing out, brainstorming in some way what they're going to write about. Then they're going to draft it, and then they may move forward with the process. They might sometimes need to move back. If they move into revision, sometimes it comes out that, there's a whole section. I maybe need to write an introduction. I need to write a part to support this middle section. And they might need to move back to drafting and then back to revision. And that's how recursiveness works within the writing process. So keep in mind that they will always take everything to publication. They'll have pieces in their binder that are not necessarily further developed, but those pieces that are developed, they'll need to know that whole 5-step process so that they can draw on that knowledge and that practice. It's important to think about during the standard that reading and writing are reciprocal processes. As you teach writing, reading also improves. As you teach reading, writing also improves. It's also important to remember that it's really hard to separate these pieces of literacy. As you teach literacy, there are so many processes that work together. It's really hard to just pull out and go, today we're going to look at the main idea, and that's all we're going to look at. So you know that they're going to work together. They're going to be recursive. And so keep those in mind as you model and teach this, and I'm sure you'll do a great job with Standard 2 with your students.